to all. Today's daf is Yerushalmi Brachot, daf Nun Gimel. We are starting Nun Beis Amud Beis with a brand new parak, and in the villain source of daf is Lamed Vav Amud Beis. And today's daf is sponsored Le'ilui Nishmas Mars Miriam Sarah Basar Yaakov Moshe. Her neshama should have an aliyah. Now we continue talking about Shemona Esrei. The Mishnah says, "Ein Omdin leSpalal El Mitoch Chayvid Rosh." A person should not stand up to daven Shemona Esrei except amid an attitude of submission. Chayvid Rosh means submission, hachna, a matter of seriousness. A person should be in a serious mode when he starts davening Shemona Esrei. The Mishnah continues, Chasidim Harishonim, the early pious ones, Hayu Shayin Shah Achas, they would first wait an hour, Umispalin, and then they would daven Shemona Esrei. And the reason why they would do so is Kadesh Yechavnu's Libam Lamakim, so they could have proper kavana, they could direct their hearts to Hashem. And more about a person davening Shemona Esrei, Afilu HaMelech Shel B'Shloimai, even if a king says Shalom Aleichem, hello, how are you? And he's in the middle of Shemona Esrei, Lo Yeshivenu, he should not respond to him. And Afilu Nachash Kar Chalakevai, even if there's a snake wrapped around his ankle, Lo Yavsek, he should not stop Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara Nun Gimel Alpha on top says, Ein Abdin L'Spal V'Chulu, so we're talking about the proper frame of mind the person has to be in when he's davening Shemona Esrei. We have something similar. If Yirmiyah tells us B'Shem Rav Abba, Haba Min HaDerech, someone that came from a journey, Asr L'Spal, he's not allowed to daven. He's not settled, he's all agitated, he's tired, he's weary from the journey, so he has to first calm down before he davens. And Umatam, what's the source for that? The pasuk says, L'chein Shemi Nazais, therefore hear this now, Aniya, afflicted one, Ushchuras V'loy Miyayin, and drunk, but not from wine. So we're comparing someone who's drunk to someone who's an aniyah, someone who's afflicted, meaning someone who came from the journey. And the same way that a person who's drunk is not allowed to daven, so to a person who's aniyah, they're also not allowed to daven. And Rav Zikon quotes Rabbi Yochanan, B'Shem Rabbi Lazar, B'Noish Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Hametzar, someone who's in distress, either physical or emotional, Asr L'Spal, they're also not allowed to daven. And Lemistabra element Hadein Karyon, isn't it logical to say this from the same pasuk? L'chein Shemina Zais, Aniyah Ushchuras V'Lei Miyayin. And aniyah over here is understood as someone who's afflicted, they're Meitzar, they're in distress, so they're also not allowed to daven. I think Mark continues, Tani, we have a brayso. Lo yamid adam yispal. A person shouldn't stand up and daven Shemona Esrei. Lo mitach sicha, not amid a matter of leitzanos. Lo mitach schayk, not amid laughter. Lo mitach chalas roish, not coming from chalas roish, which is the opposite of kavod roish. Lo mitach dvarim betelim, not coming from idle chatter. Ela mitach davar shal Torah. Rather, he should daven Shemona Esrei coming from a dvar shal Torah. Now, this is in addition to what we learned in the Mishnah. The Mishnah simply said that a person should enter tefillah davening with kavod roish. But now we're adding on that a person should come from saying a dvar shal Torah, and the Mefarshim explain that it's for this reason that we start all davening with Ashrei or Psukei Zimra and things like that. The Gemara continues something similar. V'chein al yiftar adam mechaveroi, a person shouldn't take leave of his friend. V'lo mitach sicha, v'lo mitach chayk, v'lo mitach kalas rosh, v'lo mitach dvar b'telim. He shouldn't take leave of his friend amid any of these things. El mitach dvar shal Torah. Rather, they should part from each other with words of Torah. And how do we see this? Shekem mitzinu b'nevim harishayim. We find this by the earlier Nevi'im. Shayu chaysim as devreim b'divrei shavach u'b'divrei nechamais. They would conclude their words with matters of praise and consolation. As we see with many of the Nevi'im, although their nevuos might have been very harsh, such as Hosea, Yoel, Amos, Micha, and others, they conclude with encouraging things. Now, even though these aren't divrei Torah per se, the main limud is that when one takes leave of another, he should do so in a spiritually uplifting way. So if they were just schmoozing, they should share dvar Torah. If the conversation was heavy and harsh, like with the Nevi'im, it should be concluded on a positive note. Now the Gemara continues with this. Rabbi Lazar says, Chutz Yirmiyahu, except for Yirmiyahu, Shachasam divrei techachais, he concluded his divrei nevuah with harsh reprimand to Klal Yisrael. However, Amalei Rabbi Yochanan told him, he concluded with words of consolation. And he said in the pasuk, Kacha Tishka Bavel, so shall Bavel sink. And that pasuk concludes with Ad Heino Divrei Yirmiyahu. So you see that Yirmiyahu concluded with positive things. And why is it that we're saying this? Since Yirmiyahu Navi was constantly prophesying about Churban Beis Hamikdash, Yachal b'Churban Beis Hamikdash Chasam, you might think that he concluded talking about the Churban Beis Hamikdash. That's why the pasuk says, Ad Heino Divrei Yirmiyahu. Until here are the words of Yirmiyahu. He concluded his words talking about the downfall of those that destroy Am Yisrael. He did not conclude with chastising words to Am Yisrael. And the Mefarshim clarify, even though the last parak in Yirmiyahu is yet more distressing nevuas, it's out of order, as we know in Muktam Mocher B'Torah, and it's the pasuk which concludes Ad Hino Divrei Yirmiyahu. Those were his final words, and those were positive. The Gemara continues asking about Kseva. It says in Yeshaya, V'hayu de'rayin l'chol basar, and they will lie in disgrace before all mankind. And that's the way he concludes his nevuah, so it seems to be he's concluding on a negative note. So the Gemara says, no, ba'akam hi askinon. He's referring to the Goyim. As the Gemara of Aksiv, Eicha concludes with something negative. Kima ois ma'astanu, for you have totally rejected us. So the Gemara says, no, hashivenu tachas kima ois ma'astanu. We're telling Hashem, hashivenu, he should bring us back because ma'is mas tanu. Let's just clarify that. This second to last pasuk in Eicha is Hashivenu Hashem Elecha, bring us back to you. And this last pasuk is the reason why Hashem should do so. Ki im ma'is mas tanu, for even though you have totally rejected us, katsafta aleinu ad ma'id, you've already sufficiently expressed anger on us. Therefore, bring us back. So this last pasuk isn't a kina, it's part of the second to last pasuk, which is positive. And the Gemara continues with this. Af Eliyahu lo niftar me'Elisha el mitach dvar shel Torah. Even Eliyahu Hanavi, he didn't depart from Elisha except the words of Torah. The pasuk says, "Vayhi hema ha'elchem halach v'daber," and they were walking together and they were speaking. And then the pasuk describes how a fiery chariot came from Shemayim and separated Elisha and Eliyahu. But the pasuk tells us very clearly that they were walking and speaking. So Mahayu Aiskin, what were they involved in? We have 4 answers. He says, "B'kriyas Shema hayu Aiskin." They were saying Kriyas Shema. How do we know that? Heichmadat Amar, as it says, V'dibar Tabam. So Kriyas Shema says V'dibar Tabam. The pasuk says Haloich V'daber. So this V'daber of the pasuk alludes to the V'dibar Tabam of Kriyas Shema. Rav Yudim Pazi Amar, he says B'Brias Olam hayu Aiskin. They were talking about Brias Olam. Kamad Amar, like it says B'dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu. So again, the word V'daber in the pasuk alludes to the B'dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu. Rav Yudim Breid Rav Evu Amar, he says V'nechamas Yerushalayim hayu Aiskin. They were involved in the Nechamas, the consolations of Yerushalayim, which is referring to Yimas HaMashiach. Kamad Amar, like it says, Dabru Alev Yerushalayim. Once again, the word Vidaber alludes to this word Dabru Alev Yerushalayim. Rabbanan Amrin, they say B'Merkava hayu Aiskin. They were involved in the Merkava, meaning in Ma'aser Merkava, Heichmadat Amar, like it says in that very pasuk that we quoted, V'hine Rechav Eish V'Susei Eish V'Gaimer, that a fiery chariot and fiery horses descended and separated them. So what were they talking about? They were talking about Ma'aser Merkava, and then a Merkava came and separated them. And continue to talk about how a person should daven. Rabbi Yirmiyah Amar of Yirmiyah says, Lo Yamid Adam Yispalel El Mitach Din Shal Halacha. A person shouldn't stand to daven except amid a din of halacha. Now, Rav Yirmiyah is adding to what we said previously. We said that a person should daven amid divrei Torah. He's saying, what are those words of Torah that we're referring to? Din shal halacha, which means a clear halacha psuka. A halacha which is not complicated, not one that someone's going to be thinking about in the middle of davening. Has to be something clear cut. Now, another halacha from Rav Yirmiyah Amar, he says, ha'isek b'tzarchei tzibur, someone that's involved in tzarchei tzibur, doing things for the klal, ha'isek b'divrei Torah, that's like being isek in divrei Torah. And if a person was involved in tzarchei tzibur and he accomplished what he needed to do, so then he's able to daven right away, that's considered like being Isaac b'divrei Torah. As we just said, a person should enter davening amid a halacha psuka, a clear-cut halacha. So now we're going to have 5 different examples of this. Nun Gimel Amud Beis on the top. And before we bring our first example, we have to understand something important about a woman who's a nida, and this is specifically regarding back in the times of the Gemara, because nowadays it's very different. Back in the day, a woman constantly would cycle through 2 different stages, 7 Yemei Nida and 11 Yemei Ziva. And the very general idea is as follows. If she sees dam, she's tamei for 7 days. And this is regardless of if she saw dam all 7 days or just one of them, she's tamei for 7 days. Now at the conclusion of the 7-day period, she immerses in the mikvah and she's tahar. Now her Yemei Ziva begin. If she sees dam 1 or 2 days, she's called a zavak tana, she's tamei that day, checks to ensure that there's no dam, immerses in the mikvah, and then is tahar. Now if she sees dam 3 days in a row, she becomes a zavak gedayla, and then must count shiva nikiyim, 7 clean days where no dam is seen. After the shiva nikiyim are completed, she immerses in his tahar. Now once these 11 days are over, she reverts back to being in nida mode. So now based on what we just said, if a woman sees a bit of dam, she does not need to count shiva nikiyim, unless of course it's for 3 consecutive days during her Yemei Ziva. So now we have our first halacha of Chana Amar. He says, Haroya tipa ke'en achardol, if a woman sees a drop of blood, the size of a mustard seed, yesheves u'mishameres all of shiva nikiyim, she sits and she counts shiva nikiyim, the kaimu matzli, and then he would get up and daven. This is halacha psuka, and this is how we hold nowadays, that even though we have these 7 Yemei Nida and 11 Yemei Ziva, we're machmir and we paskin like this halacha, that if a woman sees even a drop of blood, she counts shiva nikiyim. Now another halacha is Zecharia bar Chinana Amar, hamak is done b'kadshim, someone who bloodlets an animal, which is kadshim, and then he uses that blood for himself, while he's over me'ila because he misappropriated hekdesh. Now even though we know ein ma'alin b'damim, one can't be over me'ila with blood of a carbon, that's only after the carbon was shechted, but beforehand, one would be over me'ila. And aydhu me'halachas k'tuvais, this is also considered a halacha psuka that one can daven after he says his halacha. And Tani Bar Kapara Amar, achas asar yom, shebein nida l'nida, the 11-day period in between one period of nida and the other period of nida, halacha mashmi sinai, that's halacha mashmi sinai. We understand this halacha based off what we said previously. And the 4th example is Tani Rabbi Shaya, marba adam dagan b'teven, a person can mix a lot of grain and straw together, umarim olav, and he can make a trick with it, l'paiter min ha-meiser, to pater it from meiser. So produce only becomes chayiv in meiser once it's roye pnei abayis, it sees the entrance to the house. And this is because because the produce being brought into the house is considered at the end of its processing, which is mechuyev in meiser. However, if it's not intended for human consumption, such as straw, then even if there's grain mixed with the straw, there's no chiyuv to separate meiser. So he can do this trick and mix a bunch of grain with straw, bring it into his house on the pretext that he's going to serve it to his animal. That grain is not chayiv in meiser, and now he could eat it by himself without having to take meiser off. And that's also halacha psuka. And the last example of halacha psuka, Abdon shal Rabbi, Abdon asked Rabbi, kama milas b'kodesh, how many levels of tuma are there when we're dealing with kodesh? Vu amar le, he told him, arba, there's 4. And v'kama milas b'truma, how many levels of tuma are there when we're dealing with truma? Vu amar le, and he told him, shalish, 3. V'kaimu matzli, and he got up and davened. Now Rabbi Chizkiah said in the name of Yaakov bar Acha, and Rabbi Yasa said b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, lo elam al yehei pasuk hazeh zaz mitech picha. This pasuk should never leave your mouth. The pasuk is Hashem tzvakos imanu. Hashem tzvakos is with us. Mizgav lanu elokei Yaakov Sela. A stronghold for us is the God of Yaakov Sela. And this pasuk increases awareness of Kodesh Brichu. And something similar, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Avin, and Rabbi Vo b'shem Rabbi Yochanan v'Chavraya, they say Hashem tzvakos asher adam b'deach bach. This pasuk shouldn't leave a person's mouth, which means a person should constantly be saying this pasuk. Hashem tzvakos, praiseworthy is a person who trusts in you, and this increases a person's trust in Hashem. Rav Chizkiah b'shem Rav Vo says that a person should always say the following: Yiratzam ufanecha Hashem l'keinu v'l'kei avosenu, shetatzilenu, that you shall save us, mishais hachatzufais hakashais hara'is, from the irrepressible, difficult, evil times, hayotzais, which go forth, hamisrag shais lavei la'olam, which rush forth to enter the world. And the Gemara continues explaining the Mishnah. We had said, Ein abdim l'spalel el mitach chavid rosh. Now what's the source for this? How do we know that a person should daven mitach chavid rosh? He should have a very serious demeanor. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar, he says, the pasuk tells us, Yishtach wel Hashem b'hadras kodesh. Bow down to Hashem b'hadras kodesh. Don't read it as b'hadras kodesh, ela rather read it as b'cherdas kodesh, with a holy awe. Another source for this, Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina Amar, Ivdu as Hashem b'yira, serve Hashem with yira, v'gilu b'ra'ada, and rejoice with ra'ada, with trepidation, and Ivdu is a lashon of tefillah. So when a person davens, he should be in the state of yira and ra'ada. And now just explanation of the second part of the pasuk, Amar Vacha. Ravacha says, L'chsheyava yom ra'ada, when the day of ra'ada comes, meaning when punishment comes to the world, Tagilu, you can rejoice. Now we had mentioned in the Mishnah that the Chasidim Harishonim, the early pious people, they would wait an hour before davening. So Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says, Zeh shehu amidu mispalel, regarding this person who's about to stand and daven Shemona Esrei, tzarich leishiv shtei yeshivos, he has to sit 2 sittings, which means he just has to wait and linger and sit and chill for a little bit, and he has to do this twice. Achas ad shelo yispalel, once before he davens, v'achas misha yispalel, and once after he davens. Now what's the source for this? Ad shelo yispalel, before he davens, the pasuk says, Ashrei yoshev veisecha, praiseworthy are those that are yoshev in your house, and then it says in the pasuk, Oid yehalalu chasela, which implies that first there's a yeshiva, a waiting, a lingering, a little bit of time spent, and then a person davens. Nun dalad amud alf on the top, v'achas misha yispalel, and once after a person davens. As the pasuk says, Ach tzadikim yadu l'shmecha, the righteous will give thanks to your name, Yeshvu yesharim es ponecha, the yesharim will linger in your presence. So the tzadikim yadu l'shmecha is referring to person davening, and the Yeshvu yesharim es ponecha, that means after davening, a person lingers a little bit, and the Mepharshim explain, that's why we say Oleinu after Shemona Esrei, to linger a little bit, to be yeshev, to sit, and just to spend a little bit of time after saying Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara concludes, Chasidim Harishonim, hayu shayin shah achas, umispalin shah, vishayin shah achas la'achar tfilasan. The Chasidim Harishonim, they would wait an hour before davening, then they would daven for a full hour, and then they would wait an hour after davening. So now the Gemara asks, if that's really so, emasai oiskin b'Torah, emasai oiskin b'malachton, when would they be able to learn Torah? When would they work? If they were davening 9 hours a day, 3 hours shachris, 3 hours mincha, 3 hours ma'ariv, how are they supposed to learn or work? So Rav Yitzchak Rebbe Lazar, he explains, since they were chasidim, they were pious, haisa bracha nitenes b'teirasan, Hashem gave special bracha in their Torah, ubracha nitenes b'malachton, special bracha was given in their work, and in the few hours of the day that they had to learn and work, they were able to accomplish everything they needed to. We're going to stop here for the day, pick up tomorrow, continue to talk about davening properly. For now, everyone should have a wonderful day.